Hello, everybody. Welcome back. You made a great movie, and now it's time for audiences to see it. But usually they don't get to see it because, as a filmmaker, you often get stifled by distribution. Today, we're going to talk about how to get your movie in front of audiences, how to get proper distribution. If you're enjoying this podcast, wherever you're listening from, please press subscribe and become one of our subscribers, and you'll get lots more content. If you want to be a successful indie filmmaker, you need to know a lot about not just the production of movies, but the business. We are going to tell you the truth and reality of what really happens in the indie film business. All right, today we have a very special guest, an old friend of mine and somebody who's been in the business for a long time, Noah Segal, who is co-president of Elevation Films in Canada, who has been doing this for a long time, knows this business inside and out, and I'm really pleased to talk to him because I don't get to speak to him enough. We go back a long time, and he really knows what he's doing. So Noah, welcome to the show. Thanks for doing it.
Thanks, Jeff. I've never heard you be more formal than you have been right now.
I told you I was going to be formal today. Okay. So why don't we start with, how do we know each other? You can tell the story.
Oh my God. It's almost lost on purpose in my mind. But effectively, back in the heyday of the early motion picture days of the 80s, 90s.
VHS, the VHS days.
Exactly, VHS, if people remember that. And Beta, actually.
Yep.
Jeff was working at New World Pictures, or New World Mutual at that time. And they needed a sales rep to go across country to sell video cassettes to wholesalers and retailers so that consumers could walk in every Friday night and rent a bad movie. And the way to win the day was to have somebody that didn't really sell movies, but sold entertainment. And then they hopefully bought the movies too. So I was a young goofball, and that's exactly what Jeff needed. And Jeff hired me and said, yep, he's not like me and he'll work perfectly. That's how I got into the business.
Yeah. But then we started doing other meetings, we worked together obviously for a long time selling movies and doing that kind of thing. But remember that meeting we went to where the guy looked at me and he looked at you? Do you remember what he said?
He looked at you and said, you don't look like you're in the business. And they looked at me, and I was hungover at the time. He said, but you look like you're in the film business.
Exactly. He said, you look like you're a banker and you look like you're a filmmaker. Okay. So now you've been doing this for a long time, Noah. Why don't you just run through quickly sort of what your experience has been so we can set the stage so that I'm going to ask you the real questions. Just, the different companies you've worked for and your experiences in a nutshell, because it's been a lot.
Yeah. So basically I've survived for the last 35 years in the film business. And a bit of the TV business. And the way I've done it is I've moved back and forth between production, distribution. So before I had met you, Jeff, I had spent some time in production on a TV show, basically doing anything that I could do, from assisting producers, assisting editing, DJing rap parties and cleaning bathrooms. And then I got into the repping business for New World, did that for a while. And then after that, I started acquiring films within that framework. So I became more sales and acquisitions, and then general management later. And then went to the music business for a while at BMG. International, which now is Sony.
I forgot about that little stint you had. Yeah.
Yeah, Sony BMG. And then after that, I came back to the film business and worked at Lionsgate for a bunch of years. And then after Lionsgate, I took some time off to produce. And I produced films for 3 or 4 years, and then was dragged like Pacino in Godfather 3. They dragged me back in to the film distribution side. Basically, I was at Alliance, which was a big enterprise out of Canada that distributed. It was the largest distributor in the country, had about 20% market share. And I ran their home end side, and then was moved up to sort of oversee the country, Canada. That company was merged into Entertainment One, and I did the same for them. E1 was an international company and was the MD for Canada. And then from there, I exited to produce again, and then begin what is now Elevation Pictures, which is the largest independent in the country in Canada. We've been around about 10 years, and we distribute and we produce. We produce 3 to 4 films a year. some TV, and we distribute about 40 films theatrically a year.
Yeah, so you're in Canada, Toronto. I should have said that off the top. That's where I'm formerly from. That's how we know each other. Is the Canadian market similar to we call it obviously the domestic market, so it's US, Canada. Your experience, obviously, you deal with a lot of US distribution as well. So I would say there's very similar experiences, except on the distribution side, maybe not on the production side as much.
Yeah, I think it's all the same. Look, I think when I was at Lionsgate, for example, I ran home end for North America. So, it basically is the same to a great extent. Obviously, the big distinction is that you have two things. One is you've got 350 million people in the States, and you've got, at that time, 35 million, now 45 million people in Canada. So you're 10% of the market out of Canada. And then there's slight demographic differences. Essentially in the US, you have a much larger African-American population and a Latino population. In Canada, what we have 20% of the population situated in Quebec and speak French as a first language. So that's a different demo altogether. And then we have a very large Asian population and South Asian population in Canada. So between the Asian and the South Asian, they account for like 15% of the population. So, and the other big demographic difference is that the US, as much as there's so many people, is a much larger rural market than Canada. Believe it or not, Canada is a much more urban-centric market. We have the majority of the population 150 miles north of the border and down, and mostly in big cities. Very few people in small environments. In the US, there's a lot more small towns. There's a lot more that kind of breakup. So like Toronto is a much bigger percentage of population than, say, New York is of the US. So that urban to rural population drives appetite for film and television differently.
Interesting. Now, let me just clarify why 90% of the Canadian population lives within 150 miles of the US border. Why? Not because they love the US so much, because if you start to go north of that, it gets really, really, really cold. Right. So the more south you live, it's cold anyways, but that's more or less the reality.
Yep.
So Noah, you're running, you're co-president of Elevation Pictures now, and just what does your day-to-day look like in terms of, acquisitions and distribution? Like what would be a typical day or week?
Well, if you look at my role, which is always very bizarre, I basically spend 20% of my day on general management, like any other business, not just the film business, from HR issues to finance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other 80% is split 40-40 distribution and production. So a day would be, let's look at the grosses from the films we released theatrically. That would be a distribution factor. Let's look at our budgets, what we're spending to release these movies, or are we acquiring more movies, what scripts am I reading, or what films am I buying that are finished. So that's all distribution activities. And then the other times I'd be spent basically looking at financing models and reading scripts and trying to get films made. So when you look at that, you say, oh, well, you're only producing 3 or 4 films a year. But when you think about that, that means we have to get rolling on a film every 3 months. And that is getting a film ready for prime time, which is like a script that's ready, a budget that works, and a financing plan that you can sell to market to get that film made. That's a lot of work within a short period of time. Yeah. So that takes up a lot of time too.
Okay, so Elevation Pictures is, I'm going to say, well, you said it, is like the premier independent film distribution and production company in Canada, relative to, say, the studios. The studios all have operations in Canada, but not like they have in the United States. So your position kind of higher in the marketplace, meaning that you are not just doing independent films, but you're actually doing some studio level films, certainly on the distribution side. Can you just explain that?
Yeah, so basically your point earlier about how Canada is different than the States, it is a little bit different in that it's the same in that the major studios have placement in Canada. So Disney releases Disney films and Warner generally releases Warner films and Sony, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But certain films slip through the cracks that they don't produce. They may just acquire certain rights like US rights, and then we might grab domestic rights, meaning Canadian rights. So for example, we released Big Fat Greek Wedding 3 in Canada. Universal Focus would release it in the United States. We would release Paw Patrol in Canada. Paramount Pictures would release that in the United States. So we do those kind of studio level films, and then we do a lot of independent films. So we have an output arrangement with Neon Pictures, So Neon does a lot of films. In fact, the Oscar winner, Nora, they released in the States. We released in Canada. We have a really good long-standing relationship with them. And then we also do, the gross majority of the A24 films in Canada. So we do films like The Brutalist. We released Moonlight. We released Everything Everywhere All at Once. And then on top of that, we also release about 8 to 10 Canadian films a year. And those could be films that you would know and not know, because some of them just are very Canadian-centric and some of them are very American-centric. So we produced a film called Infinity Pool a few years back with Alex Skarsgård and Mia Goth, that's directed by Brandon Cronenberg, which is a great sort of crazy horror film that Neon released in the States, but we produced and released in Canada. We will also do films like Blackberry, which was produced by some friends of ours. We helped them get it financed, and that was released by IFC in the States and Paramount internationally. So we do a cross-section of movies, some independent, some released by other folks in the States that are independent, and then some studio fare. Yeah.
Okay, so is it fair to say, like, this podcast primarily focuses on the independent film business, not like big budget studio Hollywood stuff. So low budget stuff, usually stuff that's made for less than $1 million, has very limited marketing funds, that type of thing. So what I want to do is first I want to kind of dispel the whole theatrical release thing. How many indie films that are made for less than $1 million, usually the sweet spot, 500, 600, 700,000, how many get actual theatrical releases? Like, I basically say very, very few, because they generally don't have any recognizable talent. The films are good, but the production value is lower just because they don't have the money, and people just don't want to spend money going to the theaters to see those kind of films. Is that correct, or what would you say?
Yeah, that is correct, but I would say there's a caveat there. So yes, it's a small percentage of the films made get released theatrically. It's actually a small percentage of those films that get repped internationally for sale, where most of the international distributors buy, because they just don't have the sex appeal for those customers, like you said. But what's interesting is that's happened over the last, say, 10 years since the birth of streaming. Streaming's sort of taken the lion's share of the business in the world, whereas theatrical used to drive everything. Now, at least 50% or more is driven by what happens in streaming. So what's happened is you have a lot of theaters out there that don't have as much content as they used to. I mean, there used to be way more releases per week. So in a weird way, you can get screens more so than you could, say, 5 years ago. But here's the issue. You can get a screen, but it costs money to put it in theater. So you have to do that equation of, if I put it on screen, I have to pay for the cost of getting it to screen. Then I have to pay for the cost of promoting it to consumer so they know it's there, so they come in, because you don't get paid just to put it in theaters. You get paid when the consumer pays for a ticket. So basically it's a rev share with the theaters. So it becomes a very expensive luxury to go theatrical.
And a high financial risk.
Right. So people do it generally to drive a bit of theatrical business, but all the other ancillaries that follow, which means VOD, hard goods, DVD these days, airlines and hotel, which is a very tiny proportion, non-theatrical, and of course, streaming and broadcast sales. So what I would say is that that's really where the rubber hits the road. I would say that more money is spent on promotion and advertising than it is almost on the acquisitions of films for a lot of companies. And therefore, it's not just, oh, geez, my little movie, is it going to get released theatrical? Is it worth going theatrical? Because you might be more in the hole going theatrical than just not going theatrical.
Right. So you do a lot of theatrical releases, but they're generally bigger movies. Like you say, like you're going to release a Nora, the Academy Award winning movie, it's bigger stuff. So I just want to clarify for the audience. The holy grail of filmmaking is a theatrical release. That's what everybody dreams of and strives for, to see their movie in a big theater on a big screen, an audience coming and hopefully, making lots of money and winning lots of awards. That's what everybody dreams about. But the reality is, on lower budget indie films, that doesn't actually happen. Remember, this is truth and reality we're talking about. And the reason is because people don't want to spend $15 going to the movie theater, 20, whatever it is these days, on a lower budget indie film where there's no star power, right? That's sort of the reality. So if you're going to do this, attempt a theatrical release, you said two things. First of all, and you said them quickly, so I want to just make sure everybody understands. You said you have to buy the screen. which is what we used to call four-walling. So can you just explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's two options. One, you either put up enough money to promote your movie that you'll get screens without four-walling.
Okay, well, I was going to say the second thing. I said there's two things. One is four-walling. The other is the advertising budget. So you're going to tie them together. Okay.
So I'll do them both. So you acquire a movie, or you're a producer and you want to release a movie. Either you're going to show the movie theater how much you're going to spend so that they're going to give you their house. Because remember, the movie theaters make most of their money off popcorn. So what they want, they're a big confectionery store. They're a five and dime in the corner. So what they essentially want is they want movies on screen. That's a loss leader, so they can make money off popcorn and soda. So essentially what you're doing for them is you're going to guarantee them advertising is going to drag consumers off their butts and pull them into the movie theater to pay for popcorn and soda. That's what they want. So that's one way. And then they'll say, okay, we'll give you the screen if you've satisfied that threshold where they think you're actually going to deliver on success, meaning you're going to promote the hell out of something. And you say, well, no, I'm going to tell my friends, that ain't enough. They want to see real spend. They want to see hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions. Then the other way is they say, okay, if you don't want to guarantee that, well, then you can do what, Jeff, what you referred to, which is four-walling, where you can say, look, they'll say, tell you what, we don't have a busy week. Pay us enough money that would have cost the same as the revenue we would have got out of the house. Guarantee us that revenue. And then it's okay if nobody comes and buys popcorn because we're making money for doing nothing. So that's four-walling. So it's basically, Airbnb-ing their movie theaters.
Right.
And they will do that, but they usually don't give you the best screens for that. They usually give the screens they can't fill anyways, because they won't give you their best screens for sure. They leave those for Toy Story 19 and Star Wars 14.
Right.
And then and by the way, if you get in with your film, every Monday is report card day. So you put your movie in on the Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday night. They look at the grosses Monday first thing and they go, you're bottom of house or you're bottom three of the house, you're out. They don't care. They're not going to pull punches. And more so, the major studios, even if they're lower than you, will horse trade with those cinemas and go, well, you know what? I know we're lower than Joe's film, but we give you Toy Story 4, so you better keep it on screen and kick that guy out.
Or if you want the next big thing, keep it on the screen.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's there's a lot of bullying, and it's not for the timid, but that's what goes on in cinemas. So then the independents that exist in this space don't like to four-wall that much unless there's a lot of money in play from the producer that's going to pay them. And same with the exhibitors, the theater change. And on top of that, they also want films that'll work because they have to build momentum all the time with these cinema chains. So you don't want to be the guy going in all the time saying, here's my four-wall, here's my four-wall. You want to go in and say, here, I'm going to give you a Nora, or I'm going to give you Paw Patrol, because then they go, oh yeah, that guy delivers good stuff. We want to keep supporting him. And usually you settle with better terms than the major studios. They go, we like the movies he brings in because they do bring different audiences. But on top of that, we keep more with him than we would with Disney. So we'll keep him around.
Right.
And so that's kind of how the game is played. So the idea of producer with a tiny movie coming in, very hard. The cards are definitely stacked against you.
Mm-hmm. So, you were just talking about, the terms and all this kind of stuff. That's from the distributor perspective. That's when you're doing regular business and you have a relationship with the theater chains. But when you're a one-off producer, you have one film, let's say you made it for $500,000, and let's say it's really good, like it's a super entertaining film, but no star, recognizable talent. The cost of releasing that, to do it properly, like you said, the theaters want you to kind of guarantee that you're going to create awareness with the audience, do a good marketing campaign because they want people buying popcorn, I agree. Or you're going to guarantee what the revenue in the house is, the four-walling side. I would say the minimum cost of releasing a movie, even on, say, 10 screens, with the advertising you have to do in one market, you're going to spend a couple $100,000 to do it properly, which is really low. I mean, they want you to spend probably $500,000 to do it properly. That's the cost of your movie. And independent filmmakers generally, number one, don't have that kind of money. They don't have access to it. And two, they don't want to take that kind of risk. Or if they're smart, they shouldn't take that kind of risk because the chance of getting the return on it, is very low. Not because the film isn't good, just because there's no talent. Because the first thing people say is when they're going to the movie theaters is, who's in it? And if there's nobody in it, or didn't win an Academy Award or something like that, chances are they're maybe not going to go. They're going to go see, like you said, Star Wars 19 or something like that. You said something else, though, which I want to pick up on because this is going to lead to the second part of the conversation. You said that sometimes a filmmaker might do that to create sort of buzz and awareness for their film. So even though they know it's going to be a loss leader, the theatrical release, and they're going to spend, say, $200,000 or $300,000 on advertising, what it's going to do is create awareness for maybe other markets, ancillary markets like the VOD market afterwards. Does that make sense? Is that a good strategy?
It used to. It used to make a lot of sense because there was a period of time until streaming started where VOD and DVD combined generated 70% of the net revenues for a movie's take. And you had more control. So the nice thing about that business was that like people like Apple or Amazon didn't push back and limited shelf space. So you could put movies up and just rev share with them at VOD. So you would get X%, they would get X%. You got the majority of revenues. And so the consumer would rent a lot there because there was not really an option besides HBO and Showtime and maybe Stars. I think that what's happened is the birth of streaming led to a much more accessible way of getting movies to the consumer, and the consumer caught on pretty quick that why would I pay $5 to VOD something when I can wait another 30 days and I get it on Netflix, Amazon, Paramount Plus, et cetera. That started hurting, and VOD has gone through a tremendous slide. So back when VOD was king, some people would do the artifice of creating a theatrical release, to your point, Jeff, of like $250,000 spend just to get so that the consumer kind of knew the name. So they went to rent, not that they expected them to go to movie theaters, but they expected them to remember the name or the advertising, and they would VOD the movie in their house. Or they would do the theatrical at the same time as VOD, so it had the perception that the movie was higher quality, and therefore consumers say, oh, I don't want to go to the theater, I can watch it in my house right away. So that worked for a while, but then streaming started taking hold and it started diminishing. So what was 70% of the business has now diminished to 30% of the business. So now the gamble on doing a theatrical release, which had easier access to market, easier dividends, is a much higher risk game because the streamers don't buy everything. They don't let you on their service like that. You have to try to get them to purchase your movie. And in most cases, they say no.
And I'm going to add to that, and maybe I'm wrong because you have way more experience with this than I do. Say you do a theatrical release, and let's say you get lucky and it runs for 2 weeks and you've put $250,000 of advertising in. Are they going to say what was the box office on it? Because it could be that you had no box office, like that it was sort of a disaster. You did it just to create profile on the advertising side. Maybe that's almost a negative in that like nobody went to see your movie because it wasn't popular.
Right. I think the truth of the matter is they won't necessarily hold it against you, but they don't really care until it's $500,000 in box office. Like you can say I have a theatrical release and I put $250,000 in advertising, they're going to say, okay, so what?
Right.
But if you don't do $500,000 in box office, because they're smart enough to know, they're smart folks there, and they have a lot of data. So they're going to say, okay, it doesn't generate $500,000. That means it's not on anybody's radar as a consumer. So therefore, why should I buy it for my service? And so they're much more inclined to think of genre or movie stars and have their own data analytics to sort of determine whether that's value add. So, again, it is roulette. Right? This is the roulette side of the business.
Yeah. I often tell my filmmaker clients that sort of the hope and the dream is better than the reality, because as soon as you release theatrically and it doesn't do the numbers, then there's statistics saying, hey, it didn't do the numbers. Whereas if you don't release, somebody can actually believe, hey, maybe this is going to be a real hit on streaming. So different strategies. But my experience has been, and by the way, I learned this the hard way, and you might recall, my first film, My Brother's Keeper, you actually released it at Lionsgate. I begged you to put it into like 4 or 5, Cineplex theaters in Canada. And you said, don't do it. I said, I need to do this. I'm a filmmaker now. I need to try this. And I lost a lot of money on the theatrical release. Now, luckily, I made it back on, on home video because we knew what we were doing and, there was a market. But it was a vanity ego play. I needed to see my movie open in a theater, which most indie filmmakers need to do at some point in their life because they gotta live that experience and they believe that it's going to be a success. I still think it's a good movie, but I learned the lesson. There was no star power, not enough. I didn't have nearly enough advertising behind it. And I lost a lot of money on the theatrical side. So that's why maybe my experience is unique, but I think that that's more or less what happens.
Yeah, I think that is. And I think what you have to understand, like sort of in a macro way, is that the major studios have that same problem in a different way. Like, again, on top of streaming, eating everybody's lunch, it's not just streaming. I mean, the average consumer, 25 and under, spends 40% of their time on TikTok and YouTube and all those things. Like Netflix worries about YouTube and TikTok. They don't worry about theaters taking their business. So theaters are even a smaller chunk. And there's, so the consumer has access to tons of streaming. They have access to all these other services that are not movies, sucking up all that time. So when they put a movie out and they put a ton of money into the movie and a ton of money into the P&A, the promotions and advertising, they take big risks too. It's harder to get consumers to go see a movie than it ever was. So you have to be aware that we're fighting a very big battle for eyeballs. It's the war of the eyeballs right now. It's not just a vanity play. There's an alarm clock going off telling us consumers don't go to the movies every Friday night. They go to a movie when they want to. It's appointment viewing, right? So it's changed. And they don't necessarily go every Friday. They go when they want to see something specific. So you're fighting an uphill battle. The one thing that's interesting in this environment that is positive, I guess, if you want to put a lining, silver lining on that cloudy day, is that there was a time when consumers wanted all the movies to look the same. So in the years of Disney's Touchstone, not to pick at them, but every movie looked like it was sort of made out of a factory and had a very middle of the road appeal. They were rom-coms, they were comedies, they were action, but they're very down the middle PG-13 movies. What's happened now, because there's so much fight for eyeballs, everybody's fighting, they're reaching higher with these bigger blockbusters. The streamers fight for that middle of the road so much. And what's still around that everybody still has trouble reaching is there's certain niches that just don't get serviced by that. So being very individualized does still have a place in the marketplace. And the best example I ever thought of was Moonlight, because when we acquired that movie, we loved it. We thought it was a piece of art, but here's a movie about a gay black man in Miami. How's that going to translate to Saskatchewan, Canada? Well, it did. It did globally. And years ago, that never would have happened. But there's something about that said, this is an individualized experience that people can relate to because of its earnestness and its beautiful nature of film. So there is that small area of the film world that still exists and didn't totally go away. In fact, one could argue it never even shrunk too much. That's what A24 and Neon count on, is that there are people that want to see Parasite. There are people that want to see Anora. And Sean was not wrong when he said that on stage. We got to save the movie theaters because that's where those people want to see that. They still believe in the magic of cinema. The dream is alive with independent cinema, but arguably it's challenged by all these other pervasive, much more articulated ways of content getting to consumer.
Yeah. Not
to mention the world of sports eating our lunch more and more. There's more sports leagues than there was even 15 years ago. So you have to look at that and say to yourself, okay, I got to be grown up. I'm going to go in this business. I'm going to make a tiny movie. It better be really good. And it better be a message that they're not getting anywhere else. Otherwise, you're not going to get noticed.
I would say I'd add something else to that. And you better create some awareness, because this great movie that has a great message isn't going to be known by anybody unless you have a decent marketing campaign.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Like a lot of audience are going to want to know lots of different things, but I want to focus on certain things. First of all, when you're acquiring a movie, let's talk low budget indie films. Let's not talk the Academy Award winning movie, like not A24 Neon stuff, but some producer sends you, their $500,000 indie film and it's decent. You watch it and it's decent. What do you look for? Like, how do you know what you're going to acquire? What exactly are you looking for?
It's a really good question because, we because we're Canada, it's also unique because we have to take bets early. Like other territories in the world, like Germany or France, sometimes they get the luxury of waiting to see what happens stateside before they buy a movie, both who's releasing it and or if it was released and what was the box office. Usually just who was releasing it. In Canada, because the US is so apt to just come in and release it themselves, we have to buy early to get those rights before we got to get squatters' rights, before somebody buys it in the US, or they'll just buy out the rights for Canada and we won't get a chance. So we have to buy a lot pre-buys. We buy some films finished. We bought The Brutalist after we saw the movie, which was a masterpiece. But we buy a lot of films.
But talk about the low budget indie stuff, not the bigger profile stuff.
Well, no, but The Brutalist is, as far as the market's concerned, low budget, right?
But I'm talking like even lower than that. That's still.
No, I understand, but it's in the same bucket is what I'm telling you. That's what happens. There's two areas. Like there's basically movies that will go wide release, and then movies that won't. So when you're making your $1 million movie, you're competing with The Brutalist, a $10 million labor of love that nobody wanted. He made a 3.5-hour movie that nobody wanted, including the people that financed it at Focus Features, and said, you got to cut that. And he said, no, give me my movie back, took the whole risk himself, and then resold it. So the point is, that's what you're competing against. So when we as buyers go in to buy movies, I'm looking at The Brutalist the day before, day after I saw your movie, and making a decision. And there's only so much room for movies like The Brutalist in market, as evidenced by your, I would argue it's probably 15 to 20 proper independent releases in North America per year.
But that's on the theatrical side, not on the streaming side.
Well, streaming, I would argue it's okay, maybe it's 100.
Yeah.
But it's not a big number. It's not.
What makes it a legitimate, release? Like when you say, what was the word you just used? 15 to 20.
Yeah, 15, 20 proper independent release.
Proper. So what makes it proper? Like that's what I'm saying. What do you look for?
It's got to either have the chops that would link it into a genre that's underserviced. So let's say like Sisu, when Lionsgate bought that, it's a bizarre foreign language.
Yeah, I saw that.
Gritty action war film, but it's so specialized. But it's like, okay, that is action thrilling. There's not enough movies like that in market, and it's so well made that okay, that fits. So it scratches an itch that didn't exist before, or it have to be unique like Moonlight. That's just so wildly special that we see the movie and go, oh my God, that is just undeniable. So
you can look at a movie and kind of identify and say, wow, there's something to it. Like it's not about what previous success it had. You have to look at it and just get that feel, that gut feel.
I would say yes. I'd say, look, it's subjective. So I've been wrong a lot. I've been wrong almost as much time as I'm right, but hopefully the ones that I'm right on make more money than the cost of the ones that I've lost money on. And when you're in this business long enough, I've always said this about an acquisition person, you're not a good acquisition person until you've made a mistake and bought the wrong movie. So you start to get the gravitas associated with putting down money or whatever, either to release a film or to acquire the rights. And you start to learn what it takes to win. And you start to see the hand-to-hand combat it takes on a small film to get an audience to care. And we've done it both ways. We've fallen in love with movies and invested time and effort into those movies and had them not to get take rate with audience. Very devastating feeling when you do all the right things. You market it, you get great reviews, and still nobody comes. And then there's other times where you do things, but you know what? It didn't even have to do anything. People found the movie and thought it was brilliant, and they just keep telling friends about it. And sometimes that happens, and that really works. It's an amazing opportunity. So when you ask the question, when somebody makes a movie and brings it to us, again, you got to believe that you're going to get that reaction, that it's going to bowl somebody over and go, okay, that is movie magic.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's switch gears into streaming. All right, so I've been throwing around the term VOD. So the audience that doesn't understand, it's called video on demand, which is basically, streaming, being able to watch a movie when you want, what you want, for as long as you want. That's why we call it on demand. So streaming now is, can I say, probably 90% of viewership happens through streaming, or a big amount, whether it be through subscription services like Netflix or through transactional, say like Amazon, or advertising, free stuff like Tubi or Pluto. I mean, is that accurate? That's a big chunk of it.
It's a gross majority of the business. And again, the categories for clarity are premium video on demand, which is where you release a movie very shortly after a movie's theatrical release at a high price. So people pay like $15 to $20.
Like as we're sitting here, Universal's doing that with Wicked. I mean, so one of the girls who was in the marketing department in my class was explaining that, that would be a $20 price or $30 price. Yeah.
Right. And then Universal's unique. We'll come back to them in a second. And then then if that's not during the window, then the next thing is a TVOD, which is TVOD, which transactional VOD, which is the same as premium VOD, but it's just at a lower price, and it's usually later in the window. So if it's usually about 45 to 60 days after release. Companies like A24 and Neon sometimes hold back those dates because the films are performing in a longer way theatrically, right? Films like Anora hang on forever, so they hold the TVOD date because it's still holding in theaters well. So then you'll get it for $4 or $5 for rental for a night. And then beyond that, you have SVOD, which is the streaming, what you talked about, selling it to Netflix, Amazon. Yeah, subscription VOD, which is, basically, an Amazon, Netflix, Paramount Plus, Hulu, et cetera, where they pay a license to the producer or the distributor, and they have it free for air on service at a premium level. And the final level is AVOD, which is advertising-based video on demand, which now Netflix has a tier, and Disney Plus has a tier, Hulu has a tier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, where a consumer pays less or nothing to get access to movies with advertising, which effectively is like TV, but you're still allowed to click it and watch it when you want. They control the gross majority of the viewing audience worldwide, but mostly in North America.
I just want to make clear to the audience that, when you said about, you were still talking about the bigger movies on the premium on-demand side, because smaller movies don't get a premium video on-demand release. They're always just going to start at a $4.99 rental price. Like if it's not a big theatrical or a big Academy Award-winning film, like when I'm talking, these $500,000 indie films are going to be released at $4.99 for rental on the TVOD windows to start with, probably.
Right.
There's not a premium window. Okay, so tell me how, I believe most of the viewership happens there because it's very accessible for audience to, just turn on their TV or their device or whatever, easy to get it, and huge, obviously, selection, gigantic selection. Again, I'm going with the $500,000, no name, good film, but nobody knows about it. It goes into video on demand. What are the chances, realistically, all right? Remember, stay with that kind of film. We're not talking an Anora here or anything like that. What are the chances it's going to get on a subscription video on demand platform these days?
I don't know a percentage, but very, 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 very low. They aren't buying. Netflix is just not buying. They'd rather make and own rights forever. And it's not like you could say as an independent, well, I'll make it for you, Netflix, just buy it and you can own it forever. They don't care. They have a vision of what they want to make and they're going to go make it. And usually what it is big stars, massive budget, certain genres. And so they don't want anything that doesn't fit that bill unless it's a massive theatrical success or it has a very particular thing they don't get enough of. YA, romance, rom-com.
But what do you make of something like, say, the Squid Game, foreign series?
They'll tell you they knew it. I think it is quite compelling, but I think they were shocked about the performance. I think the one thing that Netflix has really done well that you can never take away from them is they somehow found a way to present foreign language content or international content to domestic audiences in a palatable way. Some of that has to do with the fact that they've dubbed everything. Part of that is just that their service is just so ubiquitous that consumers who watch a lot, which I find amazing, that they watch so much that they could just be bored with what's there and they need to find something new, and Netflix will have a foreign language entry that they might do it. And then most of those shows are pretty compelling. And I would argue a lot of those shows are genre-based too, like a Squid Games or The Dark or whatever, the German series, because they're not really making a small independent thing that doesn't really, is just a straight up soft, slow moving drama. They're tending to make a genre show like Squid Games in Korean, or The Dark, which is like suspense horror almost, sci-fi in German. And these are massive successes on those services, but Netflix did a great job of positioning those. They continue to do so. That's one of the most important things they've brought to the business was that ability. Okay,
so let's dispel the myth that everybody says, I'm going to make this and Netflix is going to buy it. Or, we're saying Netflix, but it could be Paramount Plus, Disney, all those SVODs. The odds of getting an independent film on those are very low these days. All right, I don't want to make people depressed, but I want to tell the truth. Let's look at TVOD, transactional video on demand. So this is where you put your movie onto, say, Amazon or Apple, and somebody would download it to rent it. What's the market for that these days for low budget indie films? Are people doing transactional?
Again, I think the consumer is so inundated that an independent film that has no setup is really hard pressed to get a lot of take rate. Yes, you can list it, and in some cases it doesn't cost you a ton to do so. So access to market is still reasonably priced, and you can't just do it yourself. You have to go through some other distributor, but some will do it and charge you a small amount to get up on all the services. But again, the consumer is so inundated, they're just keeping up, right? And they still go through the top 50. And if you're not top 50, a friend of mine that was in the app business, the mobile game business for phones, said that it's a great business, right? It took off. And he said, but really after the top 20, there's huge transaction in the top 20. So after you get past the top 20, it's a noticeable decline, like dramatic. It's like falling off a cliff. So I think the same thing has happened to the motion picture business on VOD as that part of the business is becoming more jeopardized. I think if you're not in that top 50, top 100, top 200,
Okay, fair enough. So let's look at AVOD now, advertising video on demand. So it's much easier, obviously, to get onto an AVOD platform, although a lot of them are curated now when they used to not be, meaning they choose the films and they don't just let anything go on it. So let's say you can get a film onto Freevee or Tubi or Pluto, or, all of them have AVOD models now, all these streaming platforms. First of all, like you said, it's a very crowded marketplace. There's hundreds of thousands of films on these platforms, and you're competing against, studio films that are in their fifth, sixth, seventh window and reruns. So what is the experience with AVOD for indie films? I know they're getting onto the platforms, but are they making money? Are people watching them, and are they generating advertising, dollars?
Again, it's not a lot of cash. It's not. But the trick of the trade really is pick your lane, right? So there's certain genres that can do extraordinarily well on those services. And each service is a new medium, right? So they have different kinds of appetites. So the consumer that watches CW is not the consumer that watches Netflix, is not the consumer that watches Tubi, right? They're all different kinds of sets of folks. And these services may want to change that demo that is targeted. So Tubi for the longest time had a very strong African-American 35 and under female demo. So films dedicated to that demo were doing extraordinarily well. Tubi is now, as they've grown, said, okay, we want to be not just a one demo audience. So they've been trying to expand that audience. The other thing that works in Tubi is horror films, because the bigger streamers don't like horror. They find it doesn't transact very well or click through on, say, Netflix. They find that consumers go to theaters to watch horror movies, but that consumer doesn't watch it on Netflix. I think that's because, this is my own supposition, I have no data, but it makes sense to me, is that you go to the movie theater with a bunch of friends to watch a horror film or on a date. And horror tends to be a female-leaning genre, believe it or not. But on a Friday night as a single woman, you don't come home and turn on VOD and watch a horror film. You're not going to do that on your own. It's more of either a communal experience, or you're doing that separately. So it doesn't perform on VOD and it doesn't perform on streaming. So it created an opportunity for firms like Freevee and Tubi, because if they're not available there and there's a consumer set that wants to see those horror films, well, they can be found on AVOD. You'll find a much higher yield of horror films on AVOD, and a lot of them do perform because they don't need the star value. They don't need a massive theatrical. They just have to scratch that certain itch. So make a horror film that's good, that's supernatural or gore fest, or the subgenre is in horror. In the right context, they can make a lot of money on those services. I remember when Tubi was just starting up here, we had like 75 movies on, including films that did theatrical revenues that were notable, that you would recognize. Our number one film for the first year was Jeepers Creepers 3. And it was because you couldn't find it on another service, because that audience knew to come to Tubi to find Jeepers Creepers. It was a 2-to-1 too, by the way. It was flying. So we were making really good money off Jeepers Creepers 3, and I'm sure the US numbers were manifold higher. I mean, the ratio is not a 10-to-1. It's more like 20-to-1 on AVODs, because they're much more prolific in the US.
Right.
So I think that gives you some indication that, again, a small indie that's not in a certain genre that is underserved will fail at AVOD. But in the right genres, you could work. An African-American demo thing will work well on Tubi. A horror film will work well. Maybe a Western, which is always an underserved audience, will do well. So there's just different things.
What about YouTube? What's your take on YouTube?
Well, YouTube is harder to crack, but they're just so prolific, right? Meaning that it's not even pennies a serving. It's tenths of a penny a click. And the consumer still finds it more of a short form medium than a long form. But YouTube's trying to drive people to watch long form there. So short form still generates, long form doesn't. They're having trouble monetizing kids. As much as kids are deeply ingrained in YouTube, the laws have changed, so you can't advertise them the same way. So you can't generate as much revenue, because the revenue is generated from a portion of the advertising revenue. So in the kid space, it's become much more about launching a brand and a property that you can either sell to Netflix or make movies out of, or sell toys and merch. But in the adult space, they're a part of it, and they cannot be ignored, because they're a massive viewership part of the audience. But on the feature length side, they still haven't quite got consumers to think of that as their first destination to watch movies.
Right. Okay. So a lot of our listeners are going to be doing low budget indie films. Like, again, the $500,000 indie films. They're going to put their heart and soul into it. They're going to try their best. A lot of them are going to make decent films. So the question I have for you is, and again, remember, this is called Truth and Reality. I want you to be brutally honest here, even though the news might not be great. If you were going to make that kind of thing based on your long experience, and again, don't go into the bigger budget stuff and the A24 stuff, all right? Stay in that $500,000 genre thing. What would you do, and how would you try to position yourself so that you have a better chance of success?
Well, I'd say a couple things. I say, it doesn't matter what we say to anybody, Jeff. Ultimately, this movie is driven by passionate people,
Absolutely.
Right?
This is a dreamer's business, no question.
And I also, a friend of mine, A24 that leads it, said to me once, the best producers make the best movies, but they also come with the biggest pain in the ass for distribution, because they're the ones that don't stop at anything to get a film made. But then they're impossible, because you'd say, well, it's only going to do X amount of business. And they go, no, it's not. It's going to take over the world. And they just don't take no for an answer, right? So no matter what we say, in some ways, we'll never train people to understand that it's a mug's game and it's roulette. I mean, not roulette, you put it down on 4 numbers. Roulette, you're putting on one number.
You're playing one number, yeah. I say that's actually, you're being kind, because that's only 36 numbers.
Right. But what I would say to people, I try to drive home, is think about this as you're not making one movie. You're a movie maker, right? So you're going to make a lot of movies, because you know why? Because you're going to make a movie and nobody wants to tell your baby's ugly, but it's probably going to be ugly. And you're going to say, well, then I'm going to have to release it myself. And you're going to try to go theatrical, and you're going to see the results there. Then you're going to drop it on transactional, and you're going to see the results there. But you're going to learn from that, and you're going to learn what worked and what didn't.
But Noah, let me interrupt you. That costs money. It costs money to make the movie. It costs money to release the movie. It costs a lot of money to learn. People don't necessarily have access to all of the learning money. And then the next time around, you can't go back to an investor and say, hey, good news is I learned a lot. They're going to say, well, the bad news is you just lost $750,000 of my money, and I'm not sure I want to try again for you to learn more.
Well, I in the absence of knowing a specific movie, I would say, yeah, it is. It's tuition, right? You're going to school. I just rather people go in eyes open and go like, okay, I am gambling with $500,000 to see if I can make it back and make some. And likely you're not gonna. But if you're good and you're smart, you will learn from that experience what does work and doesn't work. And maybe you'll pull in $100,000 and you're down $400,000. So the next one, you got to make another $500,000 bet, and maybe you'll be smarter next time. Okay.
So what the question really, let me paraphrase the question now again, because of the way you answered it. You've been doing this for a long time. You've made a lot of movies. You've released thousands of movies at every level. So can somebody learn from you? Why don't you just tell us what the secret sauce is?
I've distributed and I've produced, so I know how that feels. And what I will tell you is I learned from when we worked together, Jeff, and this is the beginning of the thing, is that when we were fresh in the business, it was all about what Blockbuster wanted. So we can talk about how good our movies were, but if Blockbuster didn't want it, nobody wanted it.
Correct.
Nobody wanted it. And then it changed. Then it became what Walmart wanted. And maybe there were other people that wanted it, but you weren't going to make money unless Blockbuster wanted it, then Walmart wanted it, and then it became what Apple wanted it, on the transactional side. Then it became what Amazon wanted, and then it became what Netflix wants.
Yeah.
So the lesson learned is how I survived in the business. I go where, as this is a Canadian expression, I'm sure you'll understand, not where the puck is, but where the puck is going. Wayne Gretzky said that a long time ago. So you look at where the biggest market is and you know what they're buying, and then you make that decision. And you can say to yourself 1,000 times over, but I want to make this very special film. Well, my friend, you can, but in most cases, you got to make movies that where the puck is going, right?
Which is, so I'm going to translate. The puck is going as a hockey reference, obviously, the hockey puck. But I'm going to say what is commercially viable that audiences actually want to see. You got to anticipate what an audience wants to see, not necessarily what you believe, your passion project is.
Exactly. So the bottom line is, if you can't walk in a room trying to sell your movie and comp it, which means to look at other examples of successful films. If you can't find 5 successful films that fit your movie, well, I think you're out of luck. And then you're on your own. And you may be right. You may be finding something that nobody else could see, right? But more than likely, you will be out of luck.
Okay, so very quickly, I'm going to ask you this question. You're going to kind of laugh, and then I want the real answer. How often does a filmmaker walk into your office and say to you, hey, I made a great movie. It's not a big budget movie, but I made a great movie, but I'm prepared to do a really robust marketing campaign. I've got some social media influencers lined up. I'm going to do a spend on social media. I'm going to create awareness for my movie because I know that's what it's going to take to help launch the movie. Is that realistic? Does that actually happen, or is that delusional?
It's, I got a lineup out my door right now with 100 people saying exactly what you just said. It's delusional. I think that it's not enough, right? I think it's what one does when one feels that they believe and nobody else believes, so they go chase this dollar value and they go do it. I think ultimately we don't do that anymore, right?
Well, distributors don't. But that's why I say, listen, I am an independent filmmaker. No, you know, I've made a lot of movies, right?
Yeah.
And I self-distribute all of them now because I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to do my own marketing campaign because I don't expect a distributor to do that. It's the only chance I have. So when you say, you know, there's a lineup at the door, it's because you don't believe them. But my experience is the only way you have a shot at success is to actually do that. Because you can have a great movie, but if nobody knows about it.
No, that's totally fair. I think you're right. I think that ultimately it's, you know, you can be insulted by me, but you don't have to listen to me, right?
Well, I think you're saying that because you don't believe they're actually going to do it because they don't know how to do it or they've never done it before.
Well, yeah, I think it's an intricate thing to do, right? And you learn over time what works and what doesn't to get people's attention. But that said, if you're strong enough to make a movie on your own and you believe enough and you actually really think you can articulate the market and you got the cash, sure. I mean, the nice thing about this business is no matter what you do, you can have Marvel. And already there's that when they talk about that Marvel, like it's the spiral that they're in, they can't seem to get the same attention to their movies because people get tired. They want something fresh. It is a renewable resource in that consumers are always looking for a story that's different. So yeah, you can win. You can win. Terrifier did it this year, right? Like Terrifier was a film that nobody wanted. These guys put it out to market. They did it themselves with very little P&A, right? And it worked. So nobody's ever going to tell me that it can't be done. I agree. I'm just saying generally, the doors slam in your face is way more than they're open. And you're right. It's not just making the movie. It's being aware that you're going to have to be able to sell the movie yourself because in most cases, people are going to say no to you.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Absolutely. So there's been a lot of information in this session here, and I'm sure people are loving it. Any final last words, advice to filmmakers or anything else that you would want to share?
Well, I say all this terrible, jaded, gross stuff to you, but at the end of the day, I'm one of you, right? Like I am the guy that made movies and did things that nobody said could be done. And you just got to leap in, right? Like, so I'm a believer in going for it, but I'm just saying, go in eyes open. I said it earlier, I'll say it again. Recognize the limitations of what you can do and what is available to you. The market is hard. The reason people say no is not because they want to make you feel bad or they're power tripping. It's because everybody on this side of the fence, meaning distribution, has their own metrics of success. They have to run a business. So they don't want to say no just to piss you off. They want to say no because they don't feel they can make money. And that's what they're supposed to do, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to believe in yourself and believe you can make money. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in the film business. You'd be in the art film side. And you can make movies to put them on a wall, great. Or home movies, great. You want to make money in this world? You want to keep making movies? You got to be able to find a way to monetize it.
That's why we call it the business. We use the word business, and I agree. Yeah. But most filmmakers are artists, and they don't want to talk about the business side. So that's the disconnect there. Anyways, Noah, it is always a pleasure chatting with you, obviously, and you shared a wealth of information, so we really appreciate that. Thanks for coming on. I'm going to have to invite you 10 more times because there's so much more to talk about. But thank you.
Happy to be here, Jeff. Just I want snacks next time.
Okay. They'll be going to be virtual snacks. Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, take it easy. Okay, bye.
So Noah gave a lot of great information about distribution. He's been in the business for a long time, as you can see. He does a lot of theatrical releasing, which is sometimes, as we discussed in the episode, out of the sort of the realm of what a normal indie feature film would do. But it was nice to hear the perspective and how it all fits together. So keep all these things in mind. Distribution is so important. You got to get it right.